but we are allowing Nick Saban's departure to cloud our judgment about what Alabama is and what Alabama is going to be. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today is Thursday, July 11th, and we hope that you're enjoying the show wherever it is you're getting the show. I'm Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that is via the podcast platform or you are here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube page. Please like, rate, and subscribe. All the same old things that I always tell you. We appreciate you guys for being here. We are loading things up, getting you ready for Media Days circuit, which is starting to get going. That is the unofficial start of the college football season. Just a few days from now, the SEC will take the stage. We've had the Big 12 on the last couple days. We also have the ACC coming up, the Big 10 coming up, so there will be no shortage of information. But let's be real. I mean, Media Days, it usually comes and goes, and we're kind of always left with wanting maybe a bit more. Have you ever noticed that? We all get super excited, like this is the week. We're going to get so much great access, so much great information. And then we look and fast forward to the last day of Media Days, like, man, that was kind of somewhat underwhelming. But I digress. I'm excited for it. I hope you're excited for it as well. What I'm also excited for is unveiling our top 10. If you missed the show on Monday, we put out 25 through 11 in our top 25. Now we moved from 10 to 1. Are there some upsets? Are there some surprise teams? Perhaps. But I think that it's pretty well sourced, and looking through kind of where teams are in other rankings, I don't feel like we're taking that many risks this year, which kind of frustrates me. We're kind of chalky, if I'm going to be completely honest. But you tell me what you think. And maybe you think that we're a little too high or maybe a little too low on some of these teams. So let's dive in. Without much further ado, the number 10 team that we have heading into 2024. At number 10, it's the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, it's a little higher than most, but I'm taking the upside here. And I think back to last year, too. I think about what Tennessee was. And some of their less than stellar performances were almost entirely revolving around the fact that receivers were open and receivers were missed. I don't think that's going to happen as often this year. So maybe I am way too heavily invested in the Nico Iamaleava Kool-Aid. Maybe I'm just way too invested in it, but I've watched enough tape, whether it be his prep tape, whether it be watching him warm up before the Orange Bowl a year ago, whether it be watching him in his only start against a solid Iowa defense. I've seen enough to believe he's going to be pretty dang good. And I think that he's going to be a considerable upgrade compared to what Tennessee played with the position last year. Look, Joe Milton had a big arm. Joe Milton had a ridiculously high ceiling. The problem is Joe Milton missed too many throws. That's why he was benched at Michigan. That's why he was benched in favor of Hendon Hooker early in his career at Tennessee. He misses too many layups. I don't think Nico's going to. And then I look, too, at the weapons that he's going to be taking the field with. And with this offense, you got to have great weapons. I think Brew McCoy, after the season-ending injury last year, has a chance to be a lockdown possession wide receiver. I think Squirrel White has a chance to make a real jump. He was open a lot last year, and I don't think the production necessarily weighs the opportunities that could have existed last year had he been hit on multiple occasions. You also have the former Oregon transfer, Deontay Thornton. Everyone felt like he was going to be the guy last year. It never materialized. So maybe this is the year where he takes it to the next level. And I love the transfer additions of Chris Brazzell from Tulane, who I think has got a chance to be really, really good. And the addition from Notre Dame, Holden Stays. Now, tight end is not a position I think about when I think about Josh Heupel's offense, but I love Holden Stays' skill set. They do use the tight end, and it can be beneficial, but Holden Stays is a guy that I think can stretch the field vertically at the tight end spot. So really optimistic about that fit, because so often the tight ends in that offense don't get a ton of attention because the receivers are so good. I think Holden Stays could, based on his upside and the ability to run straight line speed. The offensive line's decent. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have a guy in Lance Hurd that's transferring over. Hopefully things will work out for him. He was a highly regarded prospect. And I think if they can stay healthy along the offensive line, they could have a group that can be excellent running the football and a group that can take a lot of pressure off the passing attack, even though I think the passing attack takes a significant step. Part of my biggest reason for optimism, though, is I believe the defense can be pretty good. We know they can get after the quarterback. We know James Pierce is a guy that can flat out pin his ears back and get after you. I think they're going to be pretty good at the second level at the linebacker spot. That doesn't concern me. The secondary is a bit of a concern. Let's just be real. They lost 10 defensive backs in the offseason, 7 to the portal, 3 to the NFL draft. But having that type of turnover isn't always the worst when they were a group that was a little up and down from time to time last year anyways. You bring in Jermon McCoy from Oregon State. You bring in Jalen McMurray from Temple. You bring in Jacoby Thomas from Middle Tennessee. And you need to remember that there are other pieces that might be able to play early at some of those positions as well from their most recent recruiting class. So Tennessee's in at number 10 feel really good about the possibility of them of crashing the playoff party. Let's go to number 9 and keep it in the SEC. It's the Missouri Tigers. Now, Missouri is fresh off their best season in a decade. They went 11-2. They finished 8th in the AP poll. And a lot of it had to do with the offense and the weapons and the way they really established a balanced identity last year. I thought Brady Cook was really efficient. He has all of his weapons back with Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, their tight end Brett Norfleet, and maybe the best receiver in the sport in Luther Burden. Going for over 1,200 receiving yards last year. This is probably going to be his last year. I would expect him to go out with a bang there in Como. He's already developed that rapport with Brady Cook last season. You know he can really impact the game in so many different ways. Just get him the ball in space and see what he does with it. He is electric with the ball in his hands. The run game will have to replace their bell cow. Cody Schrader was amazing last year. Didn't win the Doak Walker Award. Ollie Gordon did, but had Cody Schrader won, I don't think anybody could have pushed back on what he accomplished. The guy was off the charts good, running that stretch zone play that they ran over and over and over again. So they also are going to be without a couple of solid pieces up front. Javon Foster is gone. He was an all-SEC left tackle. But if you look at what they bring back potentially in the portal, at the running back spot and what they have back along the offensive line, they should be in a good spot there. I actually think the running back by committee approach from Missouri, I'm not sure it's going to be better, but I don't expect a significant drop off with the additions of Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel from Georgia State and Appalachian State, respectively. So I think the offense is going to be outstanding. The questions that I have for Missouri are on the defensive side of the football. Now, they started to find their rhythm down the stretch, pretty dang good. They allowed 14 or fewer points in 4 of their last 6 games, and they have some guys back that made significant impacts. You got Williams back at tackle. You got Chuck Hicks and Tristan Newsome back at linebacker. You got safety Joseph Charleston back and a solid safety that can slide down to the nickel in Dalen Carnell. You got good pieces back at the second level and the third level, especially on the inside. I do think Johnny Walker has a chance to be a star as a pass rusher potentially, but they did lose some massive difference makers. They lost 2 excellent corners. They lost, I think, one of the best pass rushers in the country last year up front defensively. So they are definitely having to replace some solid pieces, not to mention they're having to replace Blake Baker, who was their defensive coordinator, who is now the defensive coordinator at LSU. So there are some question marks back there, but I think they have enough coming back to be able to supplement some of the holes that might exist until those players get more comfortable, can play with a lot of speed. So I look at everything defensively for Missouri. I look at everything that offensively for Missouri. I think they're in a really good spot and have a legitimate chance to back up the expectations of the preseason and punch their ticket to the playoff this year as well. At number 8, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, think back a little bit, all right? Think back nearly a decade. 2016, Penn State won the Big Ten. You know what they had to do in the offseason prior to 2016? They had to replace both coordinators. That's exactly what they had to do this year as well. They go out and they get Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas, who does a really good job in creating matchups, really good job of being creative, and for the most part, unorthodox. I mean, if you really look at their offense, it's triple option. That's kind of what it is. or at least that's what it became last year when Jalen Daniels got hurt. It became triple option, but the way they get to it, I mean, they have offensive linemen shifting and motioning, like they do all kinds of crazy stuff. I think Andy Kotelnicki's really creative. And I look at what this offense was last year. They were great against average competition, 36 plus points per game against everyone not named Ohio State and Michigan. Against Ohio State and Michigan, they averaged less than 14 points per game. So Andy Kotelnicki is going to have to take what I think is pretty good personnel and elevate that personnel with some creativity. The good news is I think he's got an excellent 1-2 punch at running back in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen that combined to run for about 5 yards a carry last year. Those two should be outstanding. Their tight end, Tyler Warren, I think is an All-American potential player. But the offensive line does lose a couple pieces up front, most notably Ole Fashanu, who was their left tackle. But I don't think Ole Fashanu was quite as good of a run blocker as he was a pass blocker. Elite athlete, but he wasn't a guy that's going to just plow you off the football. The wide receivers, I think, also need to step up. They did lose a couple guys in the portal, but Julian Fleming transfers in from Ohio State, and he was, by all accounts, a guy that was just kind of lost in the shuffle at Ohio State. So maybe not that dissimilar to Jamison Williams a couple of years ago, who went to Alabama and became an All-American. Maybe that's what Fleming will be for the Nittany Lions this upcoming year. Drew Aller's really efficient, makes good decisions, but I do think there needs to be maybe a little bit more. 25 to 2 touchdown to reception ratio, that's ridiculous. We know that that's great. But against the best teams, he's going to have to be just a little bit better and be a little bit more willing to push the ball down the field and into tight windows. You look at the defense, they were really good last year. Really, really good. And they bring in new coordinator Tom Allen. So Tom Allen steps in for Manny Diaz, but Tom Allen's really good, man. Was the head coach at Indiana, but even prior to becoming the head coach was an elite defensive mind for a lot of his career. And Penn State last year allowed the fewest total yards and fewest yards per play in 2023. They also posted the most sacks. So Allen is definitely stepping into a situation in which they're going to be in a really good spot. And he's got a superstar potentially taking over at defensive end from linebacker in Abdul Carter. So you team him up with Danny Dennis Sutton, and you got a dynamic 1-2 punch that are coming off the edge. Dennis Sutton combined along with Carter last year for 8 sacks. They're really deep at tackle, feel great about their defensive tackles, and I do think the back end has a chance to be excellent as well. They did add a couple of pieces in the secondary, which is only going to make them deeper. Jalen Kimber is back, transfers in from Florida. AJ Harris transfers in from Georgia. Tony Rojas is a rising star at linebacker. They got a lot of things that you would like to have at your disposal if you are the Penn State Nittany Lions. So they are in at number 8. At number 7, the Ole Miss Rebels. They are coming off their first 11-win season ever, and the expectations are high, but they might not be high enough. I mean, this is a team that if you look at last year's performance, they are improved from a roster standpoint in many different places. Granted, losing Quinshon Judkins was not ideal, but I think they've adequately filled that void with a bunch of different guys. Much like we talked about Missouri a moment ago, I do think that Quinshon Judkins' absence can be overcome as long as they have a bunch of guys step up that can use their versatility. They are, I think, a player two here or there against top-level competition from making things really interesting. Now, people will point back to the Georgia game last year, and believe me, that is one that you would like to forget if you are the Ole Miss Rebels. But you look at how they played against other teams, and I think their schedule, for the most part, is relatively manageable compared to what they've faced in the SEC West the last handful of years. But I still think it's a tough schedule for the Rebels. Jackson Dart is back. Guy's been about as efficient as you can expect the last couple of years as the starting quarterback. Threw for almost 3,400 yards and 23 touchdowns against just 5 interceptions. Last year also added a bunch on the ground. Now, I do think his legs are going to be an important part of this offense continuing to elevate to the next level. Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, along with Caden Priestcorn, round out the wide receiver core, but the wide receiver core got better with the addition of former All-SEC wide receiver Antoine Juice Wells from South Carolina. Now, Juice Wells was banged up pretty much all of last year with a foot injury, but if he can stay healthy, what a massive coup for Lane Kiffin to add him to the pieces that are Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, and an established tight end in Caden Prieskorn. Yes, like I mentioned, Judkins is gone, but Ulysses Bentley is back. Henry Parrish is transferred in from Miami, and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt from New Mexico is back as well. I really like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Now, if you watch him and look at his numbers in the final couple games of his career at New Mexico, you'll understand why. I like him. That dude runs hard, he runs angry, and he gets downhill. They bring back 3 guys along the front. They also brought in Nate Kalepo from Washington, who was rock solid for the Joe Moore Award winner last year. He's got a lot of length, so he'll probably fill the void at one of those guard spots. You look at the defense, yes, things were not great after the Georgia game in which they gave up 52 points, but Lane Kiffin has acknowledged that they need to get better along the front. They need to go out and they need to add different pieces. They need to get deeper. They need to get bigger. All these other things. So what they do, they go out and they add Walter Nolan, Texas A&M transfer, one of the highest rated players in the country a couple of years ago when he was a recruit. They go out and they add Princely Umanmielen, who has great length off the edge from the Florida Gators. I think he has a chance to be a real difference maker in obvious passing situations. He had 7 sacks last year coming off the edge. So you got Nolan on the inside, Umanmielen on the outside. You add Trey Amos from Alabama, who will lock down one of those corner spots. You add Arkansas linebacker Chris Paul, who all these guys were really highly regarded in the portal when they hopped in by every single different publication that ranks portal players. So I look at the depth that they've added and the pieces that they've added to go along with starters that are both back, like JJ Pekeys along the front, Jared Ivey along the front. They're in a really good spot defensively. I think Pete Golding is an excellent defensive mind. I believe that. I know some people disagree. I think he's an excellent defensive mind. He has his best contingent of talent by a mile this year since arriving in Oxford a few years ago. So very optimistic about what the defense is going to be, which is why Ole Miss, for many people, think are a dark horse national championship contender. I think rightfully so. They got to stay healthy for sure, but they definitely have the pieces that you would want moving forward into the 24 season. Let's go to number 6, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, this one I do feel is a bit bold. Not because I don't love Notre Dame. I always love Notre Dame. I always love what Marcus Freeman's going to bring. I love the pieces that they've added from a recruiting standpoint. I love the hire of Mike Denbrock. I love the addition of Riley Leonard at quarterback. All those things make me really fired up. The problem is the offensive line is a big question mark, and I don't love that. But I don't remember the last time Notre Dame had an offensive line that was a legitimate liability. You'll tell me. Like, okay, Joe Alt's not going to be there at left tackle. Blake Fisher's not going to be there at right tackle. Yeah, I'd love to have him. But when was the last time you watched Notre Dame and said, man, that offensive line can't block a soul? I don't remember that being a problem. At least in the 11 years I've been doing this, I don't remember Notre Dame ever having an offensive line that was a real issue. So while they might not be the best in the sport, they probably are not going to be a group that collectively will lead to Notre Dame losing a bunch of games. Plus, I look at their schedule. Things look pretty good. I mentioned the arrival of Mike Denbrock from LSU. This was a hire that not enough people have talked about. And I think part of that is because all the credit in the world last year was given to Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner. Understandably so. But Mike Denbrock was the architect behind the scenes that was putting Jaden Daniels in position to make successful throws downfield and to create with his legs offensively. So while Jaden Daniels did a lot of amazing things, I think Mike Denbrock deserves a lot of credit. And I think Marcus Freeman deserves a lot of credit for bringing him to Notre Dame to kind of revitalize the offense. Because if you look at last year, man, last year was disappointing. Given the expectations of what they had, Sam Hartman coming in, hopefully an improved receiver core, a really deep and versatile group of tight ends and an offensive line that can move anyone off the ball. You got a powerful running back. Like last year's offense should have been better than it was. And it, frankly, it wasn't as good as it needed to be. So you look at this year and you hope that the athleticism of Riley Leonard will help open things up. Now, he's going to have to stay healthy. The ankle injury last year was part of what kind of led to his inaccuracies and inconsistencies as the season went along. But I also think that I've seen him at 100%, and he was pretty dang good at that point. So if he could stay healthy, I think he's got a chance to be every bit as good as Sam Hartman was a year ago. And the good news is he doesn't have to do it by himself. Now, Audric Estime is not there, but Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are. And that helps me, well, it helps give me great peace of mind, knowing that they're going to be in a good spot as a 1-2 punch at the running back spot. They also bring back Mitchell Evans, who I don't think, for my money's worth, there's a whole lot of tight ends better in the country. Granted, coming off a knee, that's disappointing. I think he's going to be just fine, but I think they're going to be good at tight end. I think when we fast forward and you look at Raridan and Mitchell Evans, that 1-2 punch, I think they're going to be really good at tight end yet again, which should come as no surprise. It is Notre Dame, naturally. They bring in Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins. You got the return of Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and Jaden Thomas. Like I said, I feel like I see this every year. But if not now, then when at wide receiver for Notre Dame, right? You got the tight ends. You got the receivers that have experience. You have guys that have played in pivotal roles. This is the year that group collectively takes a step, I believe. Hopefully, this is the year that happens. I look at the defense, though, and this is why they're ranked number 6. I do think the offense will be better, but the defense has a chance to be super, super elite this year. I've already been on record. I think they had the best secondary in the sport with what Benjamin Morrison is on the perimeter. Total lockdown. Go watch him against Marvin Harrison last year. You'll understand what I'm talking about. You have a really opportunistic ball hawk at safety as well with Xavier Watts, who I think is outstanding. That 1-2 punch in the back end with the addition of Rod Hurd is huge. I think you have 2 of the better defensive tackles that you'll see in the country, and Howard Cross, who's slightly undersized, but really, really disruptive and athletic, and Riley Mills, who's slightly oversized and gives Howard Cross a lot of freedom to do a bunch of different things. I think the edges have a chance to be excellent with how they've added and brought in pieces that can be immediate difference makers. So if you look at last year, the 2023 season, I mean, we're talking about a team that ranked in the top 10 in scoring defense. They were 7th. They were top 5 in total defense, and they were 5th in yards allowed per play. So this is a group that was really, really good and maybe in some ways has actually gotten better. Now, they only returned 5 starters. I understand that. They return a lot of guys that played a lot of football. Second level is not going to be a problem. Not at all worried about that, and love some of the additions that they made by way of the portal. So Notre Dame, I think, in there bullishly at number 6. Now moving on to number 5. And few teams have experienced more changes this offseason than what this team has endured. But I think people are getting way too caught up in the changes that happened, and it's allowing that to impact how this team is perceived. The reality is Alabama is still a top 5 team. The reality is that Kalen DeBoer comes in sporting a 104-12 record. The reality is that Kalen DeBoer has lost just 2 games out of 14 to ranked opponents in his career as a head coach. Granted, not as much of a tenure as Nick Saban. He has not been in the SEC, but the guy has done more with less throughout his entire career. And if you look at the personnel that Alabama has, yes, there was a lot made of Caleb Downs departing. There was a lot made of Isaiah Bond going to Texas. Understandable. Not saying it's a great position to be in, to have guys leaving the program that are major difference makers. But at the same time, I trust Kalen DeBoer. I saw with my own eyes last year how he empowered players, how players played so confidently as a result of his tutelage and his leadership and his development. I'm not concerned about Nick Saban not being there for the Crimson Tide. Doesn't mean Nick Saban isn't the best ever. He is. No denying that. But we are allowing Nick Saban's departure to cloud our judgment about what Alabama is and what Alabama is going to be. Nick Saban was amazing. Amazing. No doubt about it. But I don't think that many people are going to look last year and say, well, Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator, that guy's amazing. You look at Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator. I don't think people are necessarily looking at him and saying, oh, yeah, that guy was amazing. Great coaches, no doubt about it. But collectively, the staff at Alabama across the board you could make a case that in some ways it's improved. You do lose Ryan Grubb, who came initially to Tuscaloosa to the NFL, but he's replaced by Nick Sheridan, who was hand-selected by Kalen DeBoer and has been with Kalen DeBoer forever, dating back to his time at Indiana. Then on the defensive side, you go out and get two sitting head coaches, Mo Linguist from Buffalo and Kane Womack from South Alabama. And Kane Womack just a couple years ago, really good season as the head coach for the South Alabama Jags. So I think the staff is excellent. I think Jamarcus Shepard, co-OC there on the offensive side, maybe pound for pound as good a receiver coach as you'll find in the sport. I just think there's way too much negativity surrounding Nick Saban's departure. When collectively, yes, you cannot replace Nick Saban, but if you looked at the 10 coaches that worked under Nick Saban, I think those coaches have been adequately replaced and in some spots have been improved. So time will tell. No doubt about it. Time will tell. But I'm really optimistic about the Tide this year. And I think, too, everyone thinks it's just Georgia's world and everyone's living in it, understandably so. But in the best run in Georgia history, Alabama is 2-1 against the Georgia Bulldogs. I know Nick Saban was on the sideline for all three of those games. But this is a team that has matched up toe-to-toe with the best, in some cases, in some people's opinion, the best of the sport, and they've played up to their standard all three times. So, be that interesting to see. They come in at number 5, though, because there are a couple question marks. Starting with the quarterback, though, you got to feel good about the development that you saw from Jalen Milroe last year. It started really at the beginning of November. That's when he started to take off and started to hit his stride as a passer. There were inconsistencies in October. There were inconsistencies in September. But in November and the first week of December against Georgia, he played outstanding. And if you can get that level of production from him for a 12, 13, 15, 17 game season, the sky's the limit for what Jalen Milroe can be. I think the 1-2 punch at running back is going to be really good with Justice Haynes. I think Jam Miller is also very good. Those two kind of complement each other. I think they'll be able to run the ball with a lot of efficiency. Offensive line should be solid. Bring in a impact transfer at center in Parker Brailsford, who was with Kalen DeBoer and has great understanding of the system at Washington. He came over to Tuscaloosa there. Big question mark offensively is the weapons and the wideouts. Did have some turnover at those positions. You might be in some cases relying on a true freshman to be your number 1 and Ryan Williams. The good news is Ryan Williams was a 5-star coming out of high school. He's got a chance, I think, to be a difference maker early in his career. I think it's going to be really more in quantity across the board. Jeremy Bernard might ultimately, the transfer from Washington, might ultimately end up being the best wideout. But I think it's going to be an offense that really spreads the ball. They're not going to feature one particular player. I don't envision a scenario where a guy has 110 catches. But I think you could have 5 guys that have 50-plus catches and another 2 or 3 that have 35-plus catches. That's kind of how I envision the offense looking. But it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how much they decide to run Jalen Milroe as well, because that could be a huge part of the offense moving forward. Defensively, there was a ton of turnover in the back end. There's no denying that I think there are some concerns in the back end with some of the youth that will likely be thrust into the lineup. You have Damani Jackson, who's likely going to lock down one corner spot. You got Malachi Moore, who's going to lock down a safety spot. He's played a ton of football, be a steady veteran presence there in the back end. Then you look at the other 3 spots. You bring in a big-time difference maker in Keon Sabb from Michigan. That's a huge addition because he's going to step right in and potentially be, I think, a difference maker from day one. Then nickel spot could be a true freshman, could be a veteran player. That position is very much up for grabs. And then the other corner spot, very much up for grabs as well. They did add a couple of veteran pieces in the portal, but those competitions are going to be ongoing throughout fall camp. So I look at the defense, but I look at Kane Womack's defense, and it's going to be very different than that of what Nick Saban utilized in the past. They're not going to use as much man coverage. Will man coverage still be in the arsenal? For sure, but it won't be the identity. There'll be more of a vision defense where the eyes are in the backfield. They'll be able to play the ball and hopefully create more turnovers for the Crimson Tide as a result. I think they have a dynamic 1-2 punch at linebacker, but those 2 linebackers have to stay healthy. Deontay Lawson missed a little time last year, which allowed for Jahad Campbell to step right in. But those 2, after those 2, it drops off considerably with some of the inexperience that you'll find. The defensive line should be solid The edges, I think, have a chance to be really good. It's the interior, though. If Jaheim Otis can play like an All-American, then that group has a chance to be really, really good. But it's really going to be dependent on him and Tim Keenan locking down the middle of that defense and having some guys that have maybe been a little inconsistent over the course of their career. Can they be more solid and more dependable here in this upcoming season, like Tim Smith and a few others? So going to be really fascinating to watch, but Alabama locks down a top 5 spot at number 5. At number 4, it's the Texas Longhorns. Now, I do think the offense is going to be excellent. The offense does not concern me. All right. It doesn't at all. I think the offensive line has a chance to be one of the best in the SEC. I think the weapons were really well reloaded. Bringing in Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Matthew Golden from Houston, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, and Amari Niblack from Alabama. Bringing in those 4 guys should help kind of fill the voids that were departed by the guys that were so impactful last year. If you look at Texas, they did not rotate wide receivers. Like, it was Xavier Worthy. That was your stretch the field, vertical speed, catch and run type of guy. You had a really reliable piece in Jordan Whittington. Then you had a guy that was really good in the red zone with great length in A.D. Mitchell. I think they've adequately replaced those pieces. Now, what will the roles be for all those guys? It remains to be seen. They will miss Jatavion Sanders. They will miss Jonathan Brooks, but I still feel pretty good about their tight end position with the addition of Amari Niblack, and I still feel pretty good about the 2-headed monster that should occupy the running back spot with Jaden Blue and sophomore CJ Baxter. They should be in a good spot offensively. I'm not concerned at all about it. What I am a little bit concerned about, even though not significantly concerned because they've added some pieces in the portal, I do think the departures of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy will be very, very difficult to fill. I think Jalen Ford being gone too is a very underrated departure there at the second level at the linebacker spot. Those 3 guys have played a lot of football. Those 3 guys were very, very impactful for a long time. They do bring back their second leading tackler in Anthony Hill, which is big. He's got some versatility. He'll slide from weak side linebacker to the interior. And I do think at corner, Manny Muhammad has a chance to be a legit dude. Possible lockdown in a position group that at times had some ups and downs last year. They went to the portal, though, added some veteran presence in Savea from Arizona. They added a veteran presence in Andrew Makuba from Clemson. They added an edge rusher from UT San Antonio who had 14 sacks last year in Trey Moore. And they added another linebacker from Alabama in Kendrick Blackshear. So I do think they did a really good job in the portal in kind of reinforcing some spots, getting some veterans in a few spots to go along with some of the younger players that are likely going to be playing pivotal roles for them. Remember, last year, this is a team that ranked number 3 in the country against the run in 2023. Will they be able to replicate that performance? I don't know, but I still think there's not going to be a massive drop-off in Austin for the Texas Longhorns. They are in at number 4. At number 3, it's the Oregon Ducks. Now, if you look at the offense last year, in comes Will Stein, in comes Dylan Gabriel now, they're going to be in a really good spot. All right, Will Stein was there last year, did an amazing job with Bo Nix, kept that thing a-rolling after what was accomplished there in 2023, and they didn't really skip a beat last year. 531 yards per game, 44 points per game. They were in a great spot. Then they go out and get a veteran quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. They're going to be really, really solid at the quarterback spot. They got great weapons. Tez Johnson's back. You know he's going to be in a really good spot. Trayshawn Holden and Gary Bryant Jr. are back. And then because the rich need to get richer, why not? Evan Stewart transfers up from Texas A&M. They also added a couple of guys that some would consider to be blue chip, can't miss prospects in their most recent recruiting class. Now, they will miss their center, Jackson Powers Johnson, who was awesome. He won the Remington last year as the best center in the sport, but they have a bunch of guys that are back along the offensive line, so they should be in a really good spot there. I do think they'll miss Bucky Irving, and I know running back is not a position we talk a lot about. Well, hey, when you lose a guy, especially when they rolled multiple guys last year, when you lose a guy that there's not that big of a drop-off at running back. Well, I think Bucky Irving was that explosive, so he will be a really difficult guy to replace, but I think they have enough speed and enough versatility at that position that where there won't be that much of a drop-off. Let's move over to the defensive side. They made a lot of strides last year, had 34 sacks. But if you look at the interior of the defensive line, they're kind of got young in a hurry. Good news is they went out and they got a transfer from Houston in Jamari Caldwell, which will be helpful. They have some really good pieces on the edges, by the way, like Mateo Uiagalelei. You got Blake Purchase. You got Jordan Birch. You got Tuioti. Like, they should be in a pretty good spot on the edges of the defense, but the interior of the defensive line, you got some second-year players that are, I think, going to be really good, but time will tell if they're going to be as good as the veterans that they're having to replace. They have an amazing second level with Justin Jacobs and Jeffrey Bassa, probably one of the better tandems that you'll find in the sport. And I also think they have some depth too, that this is defense, frankly, that rolls a lot of guys. Tons of guys play. It seems like they're always playing everyone. So in the event in which they lose a guy or two here or there, they should be able to hopefully handle that, just knowing how many guys they rotate. The secondary will be a little different as well. They bring in Jabbar Muhammad from Washington and Cam Alexander from UT San Antonio, but they already have Jalil Florence and Nico Reed there at the cornerback spots. So the rich get richer at that spot. I expect Jabbar Muhammad, though, who was excellent for Washington last year, he could have a really big year in this style of defense. Then you look at some of the other pieces that they added too. I think Oregon's going to be in a really good spot. I really like their group collectively. I love how they roll players. So in the event in which one guy goes down, you're still in a good spot. I think Oregon has solidified themselves and will transition really nicely to the Big Ten, have a chance to potentially win the Big Ten in year number one there in a new conference. At number two, in a bit of an upset for some, the Georgia Bulldogs come in at number two. Now, I look at Carson Beck, and I think he's the best quarterback in the sport. I know some people maybe would lean in a different direction because they'd like to have a little bit more dual threat. Maybe they'd like to have a little bit more athleticism. I don't care. I look at Carson Beck, how he delivers the football, how accurate he is pushing it down the field in the intermediates, how he can layer the football up and over defenders. The fact that he came back was huge. I think he would have been a first-round pick, no doubt about it, had he come out this past year. But him deciding that he wanted just a little bit more football, and one of the beneficiaries of the NIL world, he can come back and be paid handsomely for his services. He's got excellent weapons on the perimeter as well. You got Dominic Lovett, who I was surprised at how, not that he was underutilized, I just expected a bigger year from him last year after transferring over from Missouri. But it does sound like Arian Smith, who was kind of lost in the fold last year, but had some big moments a couple years ago against Ohio State. Sounds like he has kind of found his footing. And they bring in the transfer from Miami in Colby Young. So you have three potential difference makers to go along with Rod Thomas and some of the other guys that should be really good that had already contributed last year. Oscar Delp at tight end spot has to fill the huge void. Being able to replace Brock Bowers won't be easy, but Delp is athletic enough to hopefully help with that. And then you got Lawson Lucky too. I mean, they have enough tight ends. I mean, they have so many guys. They also have Dylan Bell, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife, can do a bunch of different things as well. They also added Florida transfer Trevor Etienne at running back, who I think is so explosive, so good, and has a chance to be one of the better backs in the SEC this upcoming year. The offensive line should be elite. It always is. It should come as no surprise. The defense, this is an area that I am really curious to get people's takes on. Because when I watched the SEC championship game last year, I don't remember a time in 6, 5, 7 years where I saw Georgia getting mowed off the football. I mean, just absolutely mowed off the football. I mean, defensive lineman 6, 7 yards downfield with an offensive lineman engaged. I didn't see that at any point during their championship run. Or two runs in 21 and 22. Problem is it happened at times last year, and they also were not great on the edges defensively. If you look at their numbers against Missouri, against Alabama, against Georgia Tech, they gave up a lot of perimeter runs. That was a huge issue for them last year, so they have to get it addressed. They do have some veterans, though, in Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson back on the interior. Michael Williams last year was a little bit banged up early on. It didn't feel like he really found his footing at any point, so hopefully, with a full off season of work, with a clean bill of health, he has a chance to be one of the most disruptive edge defenders, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country. You got Smile Munden back and a couple of excellent second-year players in Jalen Walker, CJ Allen, and Raylan Wilson there at the second level. The secondary does have to replace some key pieces. I thought Tyke Smith was amazing. I thought Javon Bullard was amazing. Those two guys will be really, really difficult to replace, as will Kamari Lassiter, who I thought was awesome. So they lost some really good pieces, but they've brought in so many talented guys. Freshmen and five-star guys in the 24 class, five-star guys that have been waiting for their opportunities. So I think the secondary has a chance to be a strength. The big question is, will they be able to step up and play as well at the line of scrimmage this upcoming year as they did in 22 and 23? Because that was ultimately their downfall there in the biggest game of the season last year against both Missouri and against Alabama there in the SEC championship. And then finally, last but certainly not least, my number one ranked team heading into 2024 is the Ohio State Buckeyes. Everyone's hungry. Everyone's angry. Everyone watched their rival win the national championship last year. And that is a powerful, powerful thing. Now, you look at the schedule, you got road trip to Oregon. You got an epic game against Michigan there every single year. You look at the schedule, and it's hard. It's difficult, no doubt about it. But if you look at the personnel, the weapons that have been added to this roster that have been developed over the last couple years, it would be really difficult not to feel great about what Ryan Day brings into the 24 season. Let's start at the quarterback spot. I look at Will Howard and I look at how many people were after him, and then diving a little bit deeper into some of his tape last year, that guy's really good. And while he doesn't possess crazy athleticism where he can run and create and do all these amazing things, that guy's really solid. And when you look at what his role and responsibility is going to be within this offense, it's going to be to make good decisions, be accurate with the football, and then obviously to lean on the run game, which has been bolstered with the addition of Quinshon Judkins to complement a superstar already in Travion Henderson, the best 1-2 punch in the land. And it's going to take some of the pressure off the quarterback. There's one thing I also know too is the addition of Chip Kelly at the offensive coordinator spot. Do not lose sight of how important that is. Go watch how UCLA ran the football the last 2 years. All right, UCLA does not have the personnel that Ohio State has, but they're going to be super creative. And they were able to run and gash defenses over and over and over again. And that might very well happen this year. Now, it's hard to run the ball in the Big Ten. That league collectively takes great pride in stopping the run. But if Ohio State can't do it, then nobody can. When you take into account that Quinshon Judkins is there, Travion Henderson's there, the addition of Seth McLaughlin along the offensive line, I think was a rock-solid addition at the center spot. But that is the biggest question mark for Ohio State. They're going to be great with their weapons. You look at you lose Marvin Harrison Jr., no problem. Emeka Egbuka's still there, and you still have a bunch of guys that have caught a lot of passes that are going to be a real handful for opposing secondaries. The offensive line is a question. And the offensive line, frankly, was the undoing last year. They had inconsistencies up front, and hopefully that won't be a thing here in 2024. Because when it gets down to it, and you're having to win those games against the likes of Michigan, when you're having to win those games against Oregon, it's going to be likely won at the line of scrimmage, and hopefully Ohio State will be up for the task with an offensive line that has hopefully improved from where they were a year ago. Defensively, I have no concerns whatsoever. Jim Knowles already showed last year just how much better teams can get from year 1 to year 2. Now they head into year number 3, and they have all the pieces that you could possibly want. And I think they actually have even fortified some of the question marks that they might have had. They have 10 guys that they'll be playing in the rotation that are all upperclassmen. One that is not an upperclassman is Caleb Downs, who pound for pound might be the best football player in America. He was an All-American last year as a true freshman at Alabama. He enters the portal. He ends up at Ohio State. Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, they'll anchor the edges. Would love to get those guys to impact games the way they can on a weekly basis, and I think that can happen this year. You look at Tyleik Williams, they should be in a really good spot as well. It does just feel like collectively at Ohio State, there's a certain level of accountability that is being had throughout the roster. Guys feeling like, hey, this is our time. It's time to go and do it. It's time to put up or shut up. We are going to do it this time. You look at some of what was lost at the second level with Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers. I think they're going to be okay. Cody Simon's going to be fine. Stoney Styles going to be fine. I'm not at all worried about the linebacker spot. Then you look at what they have in the back end. They're in great shape. I already mentioned the addition of Caleb Downs next to Latham Ransom. They're going to Lathan Ransom. They're going to be just fine. You got two elite corners on the edges in Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun, and then Jordan Hancock will fill in at some spots back there as well. So you got a great defensive line. You got really, really athletic and savvy and really gifted linebackers, and a secondary that can go with anybody in the country. You're going to be in a really good spot. So looking at where they were last year, they give up about 11 points per game. I think that number might go up just a hair. It probably won't go up much looking at what they bring back. So Ohio State has officially locked down the number 1 overall ranking in my preseason top 25. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Appreciate all of you coming to us from wherever it is that you're coming to us from. It's been a lot of fun going through our top 25 the last couple shows. Lock in next week. The unofficial start of the college football season gets underway when the SEC media days get underway. People will say, well, the Big 10, Big 12, all those other. I understand that, but just feel like for whatever reason, when Greg Sankey gets up to the podium at SEC media days, it's like, all right, the juices are flowing. We're here. Like the season is coming. Camp is just a couple weeks away. It will be here before we know it. So lock in next week. We hope that you enjoyed the top 25. I know only one team probably did, and that would be Ohio State because they're ranked number 1. Or maybe there's some Ohio State fans that are mad that they're ranked number 1 and would prefer to be 2 so they can have a chip on their shoulder. You can't please anybody in this world, but we did our best. And we hope that when we fast forward to the end of the season, you'll understand that our best was actually pretty good or it was terrible. We'll find out. And we will hold ourselves accountable either way. So for all of us here at Always College Football, we appreciate you and we look forward to being with you again next week. We hope you have an amazing weekend. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.